I am a little ditzy all the time, and my mind is often hazy. 3 years ago, I bring home a handsome drunk guy in a daze. After he wakes up and stares at me for a while, he suddenly says, "Let's get married." I do not feel like thinking too much, so I nod. Just like that, I spend 3 years as the wealthy Nolan Steels' wife. I am free to shop as I please. And I live in a luxury villa. I just find out I am pregnant, and have not had time to tell Nolan. Yet when he hands me a divorce agreement, I have gone bankrupt. This is the last sum of money, take it, and leave. At that moment, a few lines of comments suddenly appear before my eyes. Whoa, Nolan's first love Celia Sanders has returned from abroad. Is he pretending to go bankrupt just to dump Lyra so that he can chase after his true love? He got drunk back then because Celia left the country. IRA is just a substitute. Oh, so I'm just a substitute. I nodded slowly and say, okay, let's get a divorce then. The light in his eyes instantly goes out. I look at him, feeling like there is something I have forgotten to say. Forget it, I will say it when I remember. Nolan Steele pursed his lips as he slid an agreement and a pen across the table to me. His eyes were a little red, and his fingers tapped twice against the edge of the table. That was his tell whenever he was nervous. I looked at the agreement. Instead of reaching for the pen, I reached over and touched the back of his hand, which rested on the table. I said, "Your hands are freezing." He trembled slightly, but he didn't pull away. Without even glancing at the terms of the agreement, I picked up the and ready to sign. Nolan pressed down on my hand. "Wait, at least write it before you sign." He started going through the agreement with me clause by clause. The house would be mine, the savings would go to me, and any debts under his name would have nothing to do with me. He'd even set up a fully funded trust on my behalf to make sure I would be financially secure in the future. Comments started floating past my eyes, like a live stream chat. Holy crap, this divorce agreement all in her favor. I dare you to say I'm wrong and calling him the best guy in the world, but I get the feeling he really is broke now. No way in the original story. The male lead ends uploaded later. I was practically seeing stars by the time Nolan was done explaining. I said, "I don't get any of that. The bottom line is I just need to sign." Right, I moved to sign again. Once more, no one stopped me. His Adam's apple bobbed when he spoke. His voice was rough. "There's one last thing. Getting divorced doesn't mean we're cutting ties completely. If you ever need my help with anything, just ask." I stared at him puzzled. "But you're drowning in debt. What could you possibly help me with?" Nolan was at a loss for words and lowered his head. I thought back over the last 3 years. No matter how busy he was, he would always text me good night. Any dessert I casually mentioned would show up in the fridge the next day. Whenever I stumbled home drunk, the light in the entryway would always be on. My heart suddenly softened. I looked at him and said seriously, "If you really end up so broke you can't even afford to eat, come to me, I'll take care of you." Nolan's head snapped up. His eyes turned even redder than before, and he swallowed hard a few times before he finally managed to murmur, "Okay." Nolan told me he'd found work on a construction site. He would be doing physical labor. The pay was good and meals and housing were included. He was leaving right away. He stood by the door with a suitcase in hand and looked back at me. His lips parted, like he wanted to say something, but he ultimately stayed silent. Then he opened the door and walked out. I headed back to the bedroom. Nolan's presence was everywhere. In the closet, his dress shirt still hung in a perfectly neat row. On the nightstand sat the business magazines he had to read every night. In the bathroom, his toothbrush was still next to mine. I lay on the bed and thought about the past 3 years. I remembered how Nolan had once stayed up all night fixing the music box I'd smashed whenever I woke up hungover. There would always be warm water and anti-hangover tablets by the bed. Every time he came home from a business dinner, no matter how late it was, he would go to the guest room to shower and wash up first, so the smell of alcohol wouldn't bother me. As my mind drifted, a wave of nausea suddenly hit me. I ran into the bathroom and dry heaved. The feeling finally passed. It occurred to me that I'd forgotten to tell Nolan I was pregnant. The comments turned frantic again. "Nolan's true love is here. She's at the villa's gate." I walked over to the window. Down by the wrought iron gates stood a woman in a white dress with flawless makeup. I opened the gates and the door. The woman gave me a once-over, then smiled knowingly. "So you're Nolan's wife?" She paused. "Sorry, ex-wife." Now I leaned against the door frame and yawned. "And you're..." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and started introducing herself. Her name was Celia Sanders. Between the lines, she made it clear that she and Nolan had grown up together. They were practically childhood sweethearts. She also said that he'd gotten drunk that night 3 years ago because she'd left the country. Now that she was back, of course, he had to get divorced. Comments went wild against Celia is so pretty. Lyra West time to feel insecure. Are you guys blind? Let's be honest here. Lyra is better looking than Celia, no girl on girl hate. Also, why do I feel like they don't look alike at all? Same here, is Lyra really just Celia's standing? Celia's tone was gentle, but there was a sharp edge of mockery in her gaze. He's never loved you, you're just a replacement. I stared at the photo for 3 seconds. He was a little chubbier back then than he is now. His face was rounder. Celia froze. I added, thanks for telling me all this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known what he looked like in high school. Can I keep the photo? I'd like a souvenir. The comments started buzzing. That's what you took from all this? I'll never understand Lyra's thought process. But why is this weirdly satisfying? Celia just got shut down so hard I'm screaming. Celia's expression darkened, and she said coldly, you really are something else. But you know what, it doesn't matter, since Nolan has already chosen me. Do you know why he left the villa to you? Because he's about to move into my place. I tilted my head thinking it over. Oh, good for him. At least, he won't have to sleep at the construction site anymore. Manual labor is exhausting. My voice was sincere and showed no hint of jealousy. Celia was utterly speechless. As she turned to leave, she tossed one last line over her shoulder. People like you deserve to get dumped. The door swung shut. I leaned back against it and slowly slid down into a squat. It wasn't that I wasn't sad. It was just that my sadness always came half a beat later than others. I rested a hand on my abdomen, which was still flat. I whispered, sweetheart, it looks like your dad's off to be someone else's father now. I zoned out for a while, then picked up my phone. I wanted to text Nolan to tell him I was pregnant. I just unlocked the screen when the comments suddenly flooded in. Oh my God, Mr. Steele really is working at a construction site. He's got blisters on his hands. I actually checked ahead again. Nolan really does end up filthy rich. Can someone explain what's going on? Can't help you. I want to know too. Celia just called Nolan and asked for his address. She's driving to the construction site right now. I suddenly felt a little empty inside, so I walked over to the wine cabinet thinking I would grab a bottle. The comments floated past seriously. If Lyra doesn't want Nolan's baby, she can just get an abortion. There's no need to drink on purpose. Damn, she's evil, right? She's pregnant, and Nolan doesn't even know yet. He doesn't have a kid later in the plot, so this one's definitely not going to make it. My hand froze in midair. Silently, I put the bottle back and locked the cabinet. Then I sat down on the couch and started wondering what I should do about the baby. My phone suddenly buzzed. It was a message from Nolan. Remember to eat dinner. Don't drink on an empty stomach. Don't stare at your phone in the dark. And don't stay up all night. I stared at the screen for a long time. All of a sudden, I couldn't bear the thought of getting rid of this baby anymore. A week later, I got a text from the bank. Nolan had transferred some money to me and included a note with it. Half a month's salary. Use it for now. It wasn't a lot, and the amount was oddly specific. I stared at the message, zoning out for a while. Comments exploded, so he literally only left himself enough for cheap meals every day. His hands are covered in blisters. Yet he's still thinking about his ex-wife. I dragged myself up from the couch. I touched my still flat abdomen and said slowly, sweetheart, I think your dad is about to starve. Then I walked into the kitchen. I'd basically never set foot in here for the past 3 years. Before, it had always been Nolan cooking all kinds of fancy dishes. For me, I only knew how to make instant mac and cheese, and I still managed to burn it sometimes. I looked up a recipe. While following it, I almost cut my hand. I also forgot to add salt. After 2 full hours of chaos, I finally managed to make a pot of broth. Then I went to the pharmacy to buy iodine and Band-Aids. From the scattered hints in the comments about the new development zone in the south of the city, I hailed a cab and headed over. The construction site was full of dust. I stood at the entrance in my lounge dress and slippers, while holding a thermal food carrier, standing out like a sore thumb. Comments started teasing me. Why does she actually look kind of cute dressed like this? Just as I was craning my neck and looking around, a white sedan pulled up. Celia stepped out carrying a delicate lunchbox. She saw me too. Her smile faltered for a second, then smoothed back into elegance. She walked over to me. Miss West, what are you doing in a place like this? Her gaze dropped to my food carrier, and she chuckled lightly. Have you brought lunch for Nolan? He has a sensitive stomach and can't handle anything too greasy. I looked seriously at the broth I'd made. It's chicken soup, and it isn't greasy. I skimmed the fat. Celia took a step closer and lowered her voice. Miss West, I think there are a few things you're not getting here. Right now is the hardest time in Nolan's life. What he needs is someone who can help him get back on his feet.
Not.
Some clingy little ornament who can only make broth. I thought about what to say for 3 whole seconds. But he's doing manual labor right now that takes strength. Not making a comeback, the comments were stunned. Celia just got roasted into speechlessness. Lyra's logic is always this bizarre. Yet it's also somehow impossible to argue with. Just as the atmosphere turned awkward and tense, Nolan walked out of the construction site. His work clothes were covered in dust, and there were band-aids all over. His hands. He had sweat on his forehead. When he saw us, he visibly froze. Celia immediately went up to him. "Nolan, I brought you lunch." But Nolan walked straight toward me, instead his brows furrowing. "Why are you here? There's too much dust." I held up the food carrier and the bag of medical supplies. "I brought you soup and medical supplies." Something shifted in his eyes. His fingers trembled slightly as he took the things from me. Celia's face went pale. "Nolan, I came here for you." He turned to her, his voice polite but distant as he said, "Miss Sanders, thank you for your kindness, but I don't need it. Please don't come again." With that, Nolan murmured to me, "I'll take you home." He completely ignored Celia, who'd frozen in place. Early the next morning, I went to the hospital by myself. I registered, waited in line, and waited to be called. The morning sickness was worse that day. By the time they drew my blood, my face had gone white. After the ultrasound, the doctor said I was slightly anemic and prescribed iron supplements. I left the exam room, holding the folder with my results and feeling dizzy. I just wanted to find somewhere to sit down. But when I looked up, I saw a crowd gathered near the emergency room. I spotted Nolan in the middle of that crowd. He was sitting in a chair in the his left hand wrapped in gauze. Celia stood next to him. Bending over as she talked to him, she was holding a cotton swab, trying to dab at the scrapes on his face. But he turned his head away to avoid her. She wouldn't give up, and reached out to grab his shoulder. They were intimate enough that they caught the onlookers' attention. I stood where I was and watched them. The comments exploded. "Holy crap. Drama alert. Nolan got hurt saving a co-worker at the construction site. You heard about it real quick. See how soon she showed up. Wait, I got it. I know why Nolan ends up rich later." I was just about to see what the rest of the comments said when I heard Nolan's voice ring out from in front of me, "Lyra." I looked up and saw him shaking. Celia off before striding toward me. She tried to grab him again, but he flung her off. He walked fast, taking only a few strides to get to me. He lowered his gaze and caught sight of the folder in my hands. Printed on the front in big, clear letters were the words obstetrics and gynecology. Then he looked up at me, taking in how pale and weak I looked. His whole body went rigid as his gaze traveled between the folder and my face. His eyes slowly turned bloodshot. His Adam's apple bobbed hard when he finally spoke. His voice was so hoarse it almost wouldn't come out. "Are you pregnant?" I blinked, trying to remember if I'd forgotten to tell him. I'd meant to ask him to come with me to that day's prenatal checkup, but he had to go to work. At my silence, Nolan's lips began to quiver. He lifted his left hand, his fingers shaking badly. He didn't dare touch me, though. His voice was broken and raw with despair as he asked, "Did you get rid of our baby?" I stared at him. It took my brain a full 5 seconds to process the sheer weight of his question. He thought I had aborted the baby. I looked down at the folder in my hands, then back up at his bloodshot eyes. His chest was heaving, and the hand that wasn't wrapped in thick, bloody gauze was clenched so hard his knuckles were stark white. "No," I said flatly. Nolan blinked, the redness in his eyes freezing.
"No."
I opened the folder and pulled out a foil blister pack of dark brown pills.
"I
have mild anemia. The doctor prescribed me iron supplements." I felt dizzy, so I sat down. I paused, thinking about his logic. Why would I get rid of the baby? I already bought a set of tiny socks online yesterday. They have little ducks on
them.
They're non-refundable. Nolan stared at the blister pack. Then he stared at my flat stomach. Slowly, the tension holding his body together just snapped. His long legs gave out, and he dropped heavily into the plastic waiting room chair behind him. He buried his face in his uninjured hand, his shoulders shaking in harsh, ragged breaths. The comments floating in the air went absolutely crazy. Oh my God, he thought he lost everything. Lyra's buffering speed is the 8th wonder of the world. He's having a full-blown tragic meltdown, and she's talking about non-refundable duck socks. I'm crying, but I'm also laughing. "Nolan," Celia stepped forward, trying to grab his arm again. "Don't let her manipulate you. She just found out you're bankrupt. Of course she was going to." "Don't touch me," Nolan snarled. His head snapped up and the look he gave Celia was so ice-cold that she physically recoiled. If you say one more word about my wife, I don't care who you are, I will ruin you. Ex-wife, Celia corrected, though her voice wavered. She signed the papers. Nolan, I'm just trying to help you. You're hurt.
He walked over.
I looked at the dry cotton swab in Celia's hand. You're not helping him, I pointed out reasonably. You're jabbing a dry stick into a fresh scrape. That introduces bacteria and delays coagulation. Also, you're standing in his light. Celia's face flushed a blotchy red. I am trying to clean his wounds. You wouldn't understand. You just showed up. I was in the gynecology department, I said, holding up my folder again. Because I'm carrying his child. You're just hovering in a hallway. Anyway, excuse me. I wedged myself between her and Nolan. I looked down at him.
Are
you done at the hospital? Can you walk? Nolan looked up at me, his eyes still damp, and nodded immediately like an obedient dog.
Yes.
I'm done. The doctor said my hand just needs rest. Okay, let's go home. I grabbed the sleeve of his uninjured arm. He stood up instantly, completely, ignoring the woman in the white dress behind us. Celia stood frozen in the middle of the ER waiting room, her flawless makeup looking suddenly very ridiculous under the harsh fluorescent lights. Celia got completely ignored. LMAO, Lyra didn't even insult her. She just gave her medical facts and told her she was blocking the light. Brutal. R.I.P. Bozo. We got into a cab. Nolan insisted on giving the driver the address to the luxury villa, even though he had supposedly moved out. I didn't argue. I was tired, and the morning sickness was threatening to make a comeback. In the back seat, Nolan sat rigidly against the door, trying to keep his dusty construction clothes from touching my dress. He kept stealing glances at my stomach. Does it hurt? He asked in a low, raspy voice. My stomach?
No.
I just feel like throwing up when I smell gasoline, I said, rolling down the window. But I'm fine. He nodded, swallowing hard. His fingers were tapping a frantic rhythm against his knee. His nervous tell. He was terrified. I didn't forget about you, he suddenly blurted out. The cab driver glanced at us in the rearview mirror, but Nolan didn't care. The money I gave you, everything I could liquidate in time. I'm not going to be at the construction site forever, Lyra. I promise you. I just needed to get off the
grid.
I needed to look completely broke, so the board of directors would back
off.
I didn't want them dragging you into the lawsuits. I blinked. The pieces slowly slotted into place in my hazy mind. So, you really were pretending to go bankrupt? I asked. Nolan flinched. Not pretending. Legally, I am stripped of my shares. My uncle orchestrated a hostile takeover and pinned a massive corporate debt on my name. If I stayed married to you, they would have seized the villa, your accounts, everything. I had to sever our legal ties to protect your assets. The divorce was the only way to build a firewall around you. The comments started streaming past the dashboard. I knew it.
He divorced her to
protect her. But wait, why the construction site? He could have just laid low in a hotel. The construction site is owned by Vance Enterprises. I read the raw chapters. He's gathering evidence of his uncle using substandard materials on a Vance contract. I looked at the comments, then looked at Nolan. Are you gathering evidence at the construction site because your uncle is using cheap materials for a Vance Enterprises contract? Nolan choked on his own spit. He stared at me, his jaw physically dropping. How do you know that? He whispered, looking genuinely horrified. Lyra, I haven't told a single soul. I've been sleeping in a metal shipping container for 2 weeks to get access to the foreman's ledger. I have my ways, I said vaguely. So you're not starving? No, he said, still looking at me like I was a psychic. I mean, the food there is terrible, but no. And wait, the man I pulled out from under the collapsed scaffolding today, that was Arthur Vance. He was doing an undercover inspection of his own site because I saved his life and because I handed him the ledger I stole from the foreman's office an hour later. Nolan paused, his atoms apple bobbing. He's giving me 20% of his new development project. And his legal team is filing fraud charges against my uncle tomorrow. I nodded slowly.
Oh,
that's good. So you're rich again. I will be by next week. Nolan leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. I wanted to wait until the contract was signed to tell you. I didn't want to give you false hope. I just wanted you safe. But when I saw you holding that folder today, I thought my heart actually stopped beating, Lyra.
I.
Thought I lost you both. You didn't lose me, I said. You just forgot to communicate. You could have told me. I was scared, he admitted, his voice cracking. You always said you hated complicated things. You hate thinking too much. My family is a nest of vipers. If I told you the truth, you would have worried. You would have tried to help.
I.
Just wanted you to live in the villa and buy nice things and be happy. I reached across the seat and placed my hand over his nervously tapping fingers. His hand was warm today, despite the injuries. I don't like complicated things, I agreed. But I like you. Being without you is more annoying than dealing with your stupid uncle. Nolan let out a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. He turned his hand over and laced his rough, blistered fingers through mine. I love you, he murmured. I love you so much it makes me crazy. Screaming.
Crying.
Throwing up. He loves her so much. The miscommunication trope actually makes sense here because he knows she's a little airhead and didn't want to stress her out. But wait, what about Celia? What about the first love thing? Ask him, Lyra.
Right.
The comments had a point. What about Celia? I asked. She said she was your first love. She said you got drunk 3 years ago because she left the country and that I'm just a substitute because I look like her. Nolan's eyes flew open. He looked repulsed.
What?
Substitute? Lyra, you look absolutely nothing like her. You have black hair and blue eyes. She's a blonde with brown eyes. What is wrong with her brain? She said you got drunk because of her. Nolan groaned, rubbing his temples. I got drunk 3 years ago because I finally managed to buy back my mother's jewelry for my grandfather.
I was
celebrating with my college friends. Celia was there because her father is a minor shareholder in our company, and she tagged along. She tried to follow me home that night. I purposely ditched her at the bar, walked 3 blocks and went into a random pub. That's where I met you. I blinked. So, she didn't tutor you? She was my mother's friend's daughter. She used to come over when we were kids and break my toys, then cry and tell my parents I did it.
Ida spisa här?
Nolan looked at me anxiously. Lyra, you didn't actually believe her, did you? I thought about it. I thought my reaction time was just slow and I hadn't realized I was a substitute yet. Nolan pulled me into his side, burying his face in my hair, mindful of his injured hand. You're not a substitute. You're my whole life. The moment I woke up in your apartment 3 years ago and saw you eating cold cereal while watching cartoons, I knew I wanted to marry you. You were the only peaceful thing I had ever experienced. I rested my head against his shoulder. It smelled like dust, sweat, and cheap antibacterial soap. But underneath all of that, he just smelled like Nolan.
Like
home. Okay, I said. Let's get married again then. He kissed the top of my head. Tomorrow. First thing. When we got back to the villa, I made Nolan sit on the plush living room sofa while I went to fetch the proper first aid kit. The comments were happily spamming confetti emojis. I cleaned the cuts on his face with antiseptic wipes. He winced, but his eyes never left my face. The doctor said you need a lot of iron, Nolan said suddenly, eyeing my pale complexion. I'll make liver and onions for dinner. I made a face. I'd rather eat drywall, spinach then, and beef. You need red meat. He was already mentally planning a dietary schedule. The construction worker disguise was shedding by the second, and the overbearing, domestic CEO husband was returning. Just as I was putting a clean bandage on his cheek, the front doorbell rang. The security system monitor on the wall lit up. It was Celia. She had somehow followed us, likely driving her white sedan right behind our cab. Oh hell no. The roach is back. Let me at her. Lyra, release the hounds. Ignore it, Nolan said coldly. I'll call security to drag her off the porch. No, I said, putting down the medical tape. If you don't squash a bug where it stands, it'll just keep crawling back into your shoes. I walked over to the front door and pulled it open. Celia stood on the porch, holding a sleek designer handbag, looking thoroughly aggrieved. The moment she saw me, she crossed her arms. Listen to me, Lyra, she said sharply, dropping the polite Miss West act. You think you've won because you dragged him back here to this house? Nolan is heavily in debt. He's facing prison time if his uncle presses charges for the missing company funds. You have no money, no power, and a baby on the way. You are going to drag him down with you. I leaned against the doorframe. Okay, and what's your plan? Celia lifted her chin. My father can pay off Nolan's immediate debts.
we can.
Hire the best lawyers to keep him out of jail. But my family will only do that.
If he is with me.
If you really love him, you'll let him go. You'll stop holding him back just because you want a free ride. LMAO, she doesn't know. She thinks he's still broke.
She doesn't know about the
Vance Enterprises deal. Lyra, please destroy her. I nodded slowly, processing her words. So, you want to buy my husband to settle his debts? I am saving him, Celia hissed. I don't need saving, a cold voice said from behind me. Nolan walked up, wrapping his uninjured arm around my waist and pulling me back against his chest. He looked at Celia with such pure disgust that she actually took a step backward. Nolan, she pleaded, her voice softening into something sweet and pitiful.
I just want to help you.
I know you're proud, but you can't fight your uncle
Alone.
You don't have to suffer at that construction site anymore. I quit the construction site 2 hours ago, Nolan said flatly. And I don't need your father's money. Arthur Vance is funding my new firm, and his legal team is currently drafting a lawsuit that will put my uncle in federal prison. Celia's eyes widened in horror. Vance? Arthur Vance?
But how?
That's impossible. It's very possible, I chimed in. He saved his life and stole a ledger.
It
Was very productive. Nolan sighed, though he pulled me a little tighter against him. Celia, listen to me very carefully. If you ever come near my wife again, I won't just destroy my uncle. I will buy out your father's shares in the company and liquidate his entire portfolio. I will make sure your family goes bankrupt for real. Do you understand me? Celia's face drained of all color. She looked at Nolan, realizing for the first time that the man standing in front of her wasn't a desperate, broken labor, but a predator who had just finished setting a very successful trap. She turned on her heel and practically ran to her car. The tires screeched as she sped away down the private driveway. Satisfying. So satisfying. The trash took itself out. Look at Nolan holding her waist, OMG. I closed the door and looked up at Nolan. You know, when you say things like liquidate his entire portfolio, you sound kind of like a supervillain. I'd burn down the world if it meant keeping you safe, he muttered, burying his face in my neck. Now go sit down. I'm making spinach. The next few months passed by in a blur of comfort and aggressively wholesome domesticity. True to his word, Nolan's new venture with Arthur Vance exploded overnight.
The
news of his uncle's arrest made the front page of every financial newspaper in the country. The Steels' old board of directors begged Nolan to return and take over, but he refused. He built his own empire from the ground up, and this time, he had complete control. We got remarried quietly at the courthouse, followed by a very expensive, very private dinner where I ate 3 plates of lobster ravioli. My pregnancy went relatively smoothly, save for the fact that my brain, already hazy on a good day, turned to absolute mush. I forgot where I put my keys, I forgot what day it was, and once, I forgot how to use the toaster, and just stared at it until Nolan came up behind me and pushed the lever down. Through it all, Nolan was a rock. He worked from home as much as he could. Whenever the comments would pop up to warn me about a minor plot point, like a jealous business rival trying to leak fake news, or a distant relative trying to ask for money, Nolan had already handled it before I even had to speak. Nolan is the ultimate green flag. Remember when we thought he was a cheating scumbag in Chapter 1? I owe him an apology. The baby is coming soon. I can't
wait.
One evening, deep into my 8th month, I was sitting on the couch eating a bowl of strawberries. My belly was massive and I was using it as a convenient table for my snack bowl. Nolan was sitting on the floor next to the couch, assembling a high chair.
He
was wearing a ridiculously expensive tailored shirt, sleeves rolled up entirely, focused on a tiny silver screw. Nolan, I said lazily. He hummed, not looking up. Do you ever feel like we're characters in a book? He paused, the screwdriver freezing in his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. If we are, I hope the author knows I'm incredibly grateful to them.
Why?
Because they wrote you into my life, he said simply. He leaned up and kissed my knee. And because they gave me a second chance to do things right. I popped a strawberry into my mouth and chewed slowly. I looked at the air next to his head. Oh, he broke the 4th wall with love. I'm crying in the club, RN. Best couple ever. Yeah, I said, smiling around the strawberry. They're pretty nice comments.
I
mean authors. Nolan chuckled, shaking his head as he went back to the high chair. He probably thought it was just my pregnancy brain talking again. And maybe it was. But as I sat there, watching the man who had torn down his own life just to keep me safe, I realized I didn't mind being a little hazy. Sometimes you don't need to overthink things. Sometimes you just bring home a handsome guy, agree to marry him, and let the pieces fall exactly where they are meant to. 3 weeks later, our daughter was born. We named her Maya. She had my dark hair and Nolan's intense, observant eyes. When Nolan held her for the first time in the hospital room, his hands were trembling just as badly as they had at the construction site. But this time, his eyes weren't red from despair. They were bright with tears of absolute joy. He looked at me, sitting tiredly in the hospital bed, and smiled. "Thank you," he whispered, pressing a kiss to Maya's tiny forehead. "I love you, Lyra. I love you both so much." I looked at my little family. Then I looked at the space just above the hospital bed. The end. What a journey. Goodbye, Lyra. Have a beautiful life. October 10th would read. Again. The golden letters lingered in the air for a few seconds, shimmering in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the hospital window. Slowly, they began to fade, dissolving into tiny sparks before vanishing completely. The comments were gone. The story was over. But as I reached out and let Nolan intertwine his warm fingers with mine, feeling the solid, real weight of his hand and hearing the soft breathing of our daughter, I knew our actual life was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, my mind felt completely, perfectly clear.